Chapter 21 of When Knighthood Was in Flower. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Judy Guinan. When Knighthood Was in Flower by Charles Major. Chapter 21, Letters from a Queen. Upon our return to England, I left Jane down in Suffolk with her uncle Lord Bolingbroke, having determined never to permit her to come within sight of King Henry again, if I could prevent it. Then went up to London with the twofold purpose of seeing Brandon and resigning my place as master of the dance. When I presented myself to the king and told him of my marriage, he flew into a great passion because we had not asked his consent. One of his whims was that everyone must ask his permission to do anything, to eat or sleep or say one's prayers, especially to marry, if the lady was of a degree entitled to a king's ward. Jane fortunately had no estate, the king's father having stolen it from her when she was an infant, so all the king could do about our marriage was to grumble, which I let him do to his heart's content. "I wish also to thank your majesty for the 1,000 kindnesses you have shown me," I said, "and although it grieves me to my heart to separate from you, circumstances compel me to tender my resignation as your master of dance." Upon this he was kind enough to express regret and ask me to reconsider, but I stood my ground firmly, and then and there ended my official relations with Henry Tudor forever. Upon taking my leave of the king, I sought Brandon, whom I found comfortably ensconced in our old quarters, he preferring them to much more pretentious apartments offered him in another part of the palace. The king had given him some new furnishings for them, and as I was to remain a few days to attend to some matters of business, he invited me to share his comfort with him, and I gladly did so. Those few days with Brandon were my farewell to individuality. Thereafter I was to be so mysteriously intermingled with Jane that I was only a part, and a small part at that, I fear, of two. I did not, of course, regret the change, since it was the one thing in life I most longed for, yet the period was tinged with a faint sentiment of pathos at parting from the old life that had been so kind to me, and which I was leaving forever. I say I did not regret it, and though I was leaving my old haunts and companions and friends so dear to me, I was finding them all again in Jane, who was friend as well as wife. Mary's letter was in one of my boxes which had been delayed, and Jane was to forward it to me when it should come. When I told Brandon of it, I dwelt with emphasis upon its bulk, and he, of course, was delighted and impatient to have it. I had put the letter in the box, but there was something else which Mary had sent to him that I carried with me. It was a sum of money sufficient to pay the debt against his father's estate, and in addition to buy some large tracts of land adjoining. Brandon did not hesitate to accept the money, and seemed glad that it had come from Mary, she doubtless being the only person from whom he would have taken it. One of Brandon's sisters had married a rich merchant at Ipswich, and another was soon to marry a Scotch gentleman. The brother would probably never marry, so Brandon would eventually have to take charge of the estates. In fact, he afterwards lived there many years, and as Jane and I had purchased a little estate near by, which had been generously added to by Jane's uncle, we saw a great deal of him, but I am getting ahead of my story again. The D'Angelym complication troubled me greatly, notwithstanding my faith in Mary, and although I had resolved to say nothing to Brandon about it, I soon told him plainly what I thought and feared. He replied with a low, contented little laugh, "Do not fear for Mary, I do not. That young fellow is a different stuff, I know, from the old king, but I have all faith in her purity and ability to take care of herself. Before she left, she promised to be true to me, whatever befell, and I trust her entirely. I'm not so unhappy by any means as one would expect, am I?" And I was compelled to admit that he certainly was not. So it seems they had met, as Jane and I suspected, but how Mary managed it, I am sure I cannot tell. She beat the very deuce for having her own way by hook or by crook. Then came the bulky letter, which Brandon pounced upon and eagerly devoured. I leave out most of the sentimental passages, which, like effervescent wine, lose favour quickly. She said in part, "To Master Brandon, Sir and dear friend, greeting. After leaving thee long time that I had mightily grief and dole within my heart that it was like to break, for my separation from thee was so much harder to bear than even I had taken thought of, and I also doubted me that I could live in Paris as I did wish. Sleep rested not upon my weary eyes, and of a very deed could I neither eat nor drink, since food distasted me like a nausea, and wine did strangle in my throat. This lasted through my journey hither, which I did prolong upon many pretexts nearly 2 months. But when I did at last rest mine eyes for the first time upon this King Louis's face, I well knew that I could rule him, and when I did arrive and had adjusted myself in this Paris, I found it so easy that my heart leaped for very joy. Beauty goes so far in this inflammable people that as easily do I rule them all, and truly doth a servile subject make a sharp capricious tyrant. Thereby the misfortune which hath come upon us is of so much less evil, and is so like to be of short duration, that I am almost happy, but for lack of thee, and sometimes think that after it all may verily be blessing unseen. This new unexpected face upon our trouble hath so driven the old gnawing ache out of my heart, that I love to be alone and dream open-eyed of the time of a surety not far off when I shall be with thee. It is ofttimes sore hard for me, who have never waited, to have to wait like a patient Christella, which of truth I am not, for this which I do so want. But I try to make myself content with the thought that full sure it will not be for long, and that when this tedious time hath spent itself, we shall look back upon it as a very soul school, and shall rather joy that we did not purchase our heaven too cheaply. I said I find it easy to live here as I wish, and did begin to tell thee how it was, when I ran off into telling of how I long for thee, so I will try again. This Louis, to begin with, is but the veriest shadow of a man, of whom thou needest have not one jealous thought. He is on a bed of sickness most of the time of his own accord, and if perchance he be but fairly well a day or so, I do straightway make him ill again in one way or another, and, please God, hope to wear him out entirely ere a long time. Of a deed, brother Henry was right. Better had it been for Louis to have married a human devil than me, for it maketh a very one out of me, if mine eyes but rest upon him. And thou knowest full well what kind of a devil I make. Brother Henry knoweth, at any rate. For all this do I grieve, but have no remedy, nor want one. I sometimes do almost compassionate the old king, but I cannot forbear, for he turneth my very blood to biting gall, and must even take the consequences of his own folly. Truly is he wild for love of me, this poor old man, and for more I hold him a distance, and more he fondly dotes. I do verily believe he would try to stand upon his foolish old head, did I but insist. I sometimes have a thought to make him try it. He doth enough that is senseless and absurd in all conscience, and as it is. At all of this do the courtiers smile and laugh, and put me forward to other pranks, that is, all but a few of the elders, who shake their heads, but dare do nothing else, for fear of the Dauphin, who will soon be king, and who stands first in urging and abetting me. So it is easy for me to do what I wish, and above all to leave undone that which I wish not, for I do easily rule them all, as good Sir Edwin and dear Jane will testify. I have a ball every night, wherein I do make a deal of amusement for every one, by dancing la volta with his majesty, until his heels and his poor head too are like to fall off. Others importune me for those dances, especially the Dauphin, but I laugh and shake my head, and say that I will dance with no one but the king, because he dances so well. This pleases his majesty mightily, and maketh an opening for me to avoid the touch of other men. For I am jealous of myself for thy sake, and save and garner every little touch for thee. Sir Edwin will tell you that I dance with no one else, and surely never will. You remember well, I doubt not, when thou first didst teach me this new dance, how delightful it was, and yet how at first it did frighten and anger me. Thou canst not know how my heart beat during all the time of that first dance. I thought of a surety it would burst, and then the wild thrill of frightened ecstasy that made my blood run like fire. I knew it must be wrong, for it was in truth too sweet a thing to be right. And then I grew angry at thee as the cause of my wrongdoing, and scolded thee and repented it as usual. Truly didst thou conquer, not win me. Then afterwards withal it so frightened me, how I longed to dance again, and could in no way stay myself from asking. At times could I hardly wait till evening fell, and when upon occasion thou didst not come, I was so angry I said I hated thee. What thou must have thought of me so forward and bold. And that afternoon all I think of it every hour, and see and hear it all, and live it o'er and o'er, as a sweeter grows with memory's ripening touch. Some moments there are that send their glad ripple down through life's stream on the verge of the grave, and truly blessed is one who can smile upon and kiss these memory waves, and draw from thence a bliss that never fails. But thou knowest full well my heart, and I need not tease thee with its outpourings. There is yet another matter of which I wish to write in very earnestness. Sir Edwin spoke to me thereof, and what he said hath given me serious thought. I thank him for his words, of which he will tell thee in full if thou but importune him thereto. It is this: the Dauphin Francis d'Angoulême hath fallen desperately fond of me, and is quite as importunate and almost as foolish as the elder lover. This people in this strange land of France have in sooth some curious notions. For an example thereto, no one thinks to find anything unseeming in the Dauphin's conduct, by reason of his having already a wife, and more that wife the Princess Claude, daughter to the king. I laugh at him, and let him say what he will, for in truth I am powerless to prevent it. Words cannot scar even a rose leaf, and will not harm me. Then by his help and example I am justified in the eyes of the court, in that I do so treat the king, which otherwise it were impossible for me to do and live here. So however much I may loathe them, yet I am driven to tolerate his words, which I turn off with a laugh, making sure thou mayest know that when it comes to nothing more than words. And thus it is, however much I wish it not, that I do use him to help me treat the king as I like, and do then use the old king as my buckler against this duke's too great familiarity. But, my friend, when the king comes to die, then shall I have my fears of this young Francis d'Angoulême, and he is desperate for me, and I know not what length he might go. The king cannot live long, as the thread of his life is like a rotten flax, and when he dies thou must come without delay, since I shall be in deadly peril. I have a messenger waiting at all hours, ready to send thee upon a moment's notice, and when he comes, waste not a precious instant. It may mean all to thee and me. I could write on and on forever, but it would only be to tell thee o'er and o'er that my heart is full of thee to overflowing. I thank thee that thou hast never doubted me, and will see that thou hast hereafter only good cause for better faith. Mary Regina. Regina, that was all, only a queen. Surely no one could charge Brandon with possessing too modest taste. It was, I think, during the second week in December that I gave this letter to Brandon, and about a fortnight later there came to him a messenger from Paris bringing another from Mary as follows. Master Charles Brandon. Sir and dear friend, greeting. I have but time to write that the king is so ill he cannot but die ere morning. Thou knowest that which I last wrote to thee. In addition thereto, I would say that although I have, as thou knowest, my brother's permission to marry whom I wish, yet as I have this one consent, it is safer that we act upon that rather than to be so scrupulous as to ask for another. So it were better that thou take me to wife upon the old one, rather than risk the necessity of having to do it without any. I say no more, but come with all speed, thou knowest. Mary. It is needless to say that Brandon started in haste for Paris. He left court for the ostensible purpose of paying me a visit to come to Ipswich, whence we sailed. The French king was dead before Mary's message reached London, and when we arrived at Paris, Francis I reigned on the throne of his father-in-law, and I had guessed only too accurately. As soon as the restraint of the old king's presence, light as it had been, was removed, the young king opened his attack upon Mary in dreadful earnest. He begged and pleaded and swore his love, which was surely manifest enough, and within 3 days after the old king's death, offered to divorce Claude and make Mary his queen. When she refused his flattering offer, his surprise was genuine. "Do you know what you refuse?" he asked in a temper. "I offer to make you my wife, queen of 15 millions of the greatest subjects on earth. And are you such a fool as to refuse a gift like that, and a man like me for a husband?" "That I am, your majesty, and with a good grace. I am queen of France without your help, and care not so much as 1 penny for the honor. It is greater to be a princess of England. As for this love you avow, I would make so bold as to suggest that you have a good true wife to whom you would do well to give it all. To me it is nothing, even were you 1,000 times the king you are. My heart is another's, and I have my brother's permission to marry him." "Another's? God's soul, tell me who this fellow is, that I may spit him on my sword." "No, no, you would not. Even if you were valiant and grand as you think yourself, you would be but a child in his hands." Francis was furious, and had Mary's apartments guarded to prevent her escape, swearing he would have his way. As soon as Brandon and I arrived in Paris, we took private lodgings, and well it was that we did. I at once went out to reconnoitre, and found the widowed queen a prisoner in the old Palace des Tournelles. With the help of Queen Claude, I secretly obtained an interview, and learned the true state of affairs. Had Brandon been recognized and his mission known in Paris, he would certainly have been assassinated by order of Francis. When I saw the whole situation with Mary, nothing less than a prisoner in the palace, I was ready to give up without a struggle. But not so Mary. Her brain was worth having, so fertile was it in expedients, and while I was ready to despair, she was only getting herself in a good fighting order. After Mary's refusal of Francis, and after he had learned that the sacrifice of Claude would not help him, he grew desperate and determined to keep the English girl in his court at any price and by any means. So he hit upon the scheme of marrying her to his weak-minded cousin, the Count of Savory. To that end he sent a hurried embassy to Henry VIII, offering, in case of the Savory marriage, to pay back Mary's dower of 400,000 crowns. He offered to help Henry in the matter of the imperial crown in case of Maximilian's death, a help much greater than any King Louis could have given. He also offered to confirm Henry in all his French possessions, and to relinquish all claims of his own thereto, all as the price of one 18-year-old girl. Do you wonder she had an exalted estimate of her own value? As to Henry, it of course need not be said that half the price offered would have bought him to break an oath made upon the true cross itself. The promise he had made to Mary, broken in intent before it was given, stood not for an instant in the way of the French king's wishes, and Henry, with a turpitude begotten of greed, was as hasty in sending an embassy to accept the offer as Francis had been to make it. It mattered not to him that what new torture he put upon his sister. The price, I believe, was sufficient to have induced him to cut off her head with his own hands. If Francis and Henry were quick in their movements, Mary was quicker. Her plan was made in the twinkling of an eye. Immediately upon seeing me at the palace, she sent for Queen Claude, with whom she had become fast friends, and told her all she knew. She did not know of the scheme for the sake of her marriage, though Queen Claude did, and fully explained it to Mary. Naturally enough, Claude would be glad to get Mary as far away from France and her husband as possible, and was only too willing to lend a helping hand to our purpose, or to Mary's rather, for she was the leader. We quickly agreed among ourselves that Mary and Queen Claude would within an hour go out in Claude's new coach for the ostensible purpose of hearing Mass. Brandon and I were to go in the same little chapel in which Jane and I had been married, where Mary and the little priest could administer the sacrament of marriage and perform the ceremony as well as if there were twice as large. I hurriedly found Brandon and repaired to the little chapel, where he waited for a very long time, we thought. At last the two queens entered as if to make their devotions. As soon as Brandon and Mary caught sight of each other, Queen Claude and I began to examine the shrines and decipher the Latin inscriptions. If these two had not married soon, they would have been the death of me. I was compelled at length to remind them that time was very precious just at that junction, whereupon Mary, who was half laughing, half crying, lifted her hands to her hair and let it fall in all lustrous wealth down her shoulders. When Brandon saw this, he fell upon his knee and kissed the hem of her gown, and she, stooping over him, raised him to his feet and placed her hand in his. Thus Mary was married to the man to save whose life she had 4 months before married the French king. She and Queen Claude had forgotten nothing, and all arrangements were completed for the flight. A messenger had been dispatched 2 hours before with an order from Queen Claude that a ship should be waiting at Dieppe, ready to sail immediately upon our arrival. After the ceremony, Claude quickly bound up Mary's hair, and the queens departed from the chapel in their coach. We soon followed, meeting them again at St. Denis Gate, where we found the best of horses and 4 sturdy men awaiting us. The messenger to Dieppe, who had preceded us, would arrange for relays, and as Mary, according to her wont, when she had another to rely upon, had taken the opportunity to become thoroughly frightened, no time was lost. We made these 40 leagues in less than 24 hours from the time of starting, having paused only for a short rest at a little town near Rouen, which city we carefully passed around. We had little fear of being overtaken at the rate we were riding, but Mary said she supposed the wind would die down for a month immediately upon our arrival at Dieppe. Fortunately, no one pursued us, thanks to Queen Claude, who had spread the report that Mary was ill, and fortunately also, much to Mary's surprise and delight, when we arrived at Dieppe, as fair a wind as a sailor's heart could wish was blowing right up the channel. It was a part of the system of relays, horses, ship, and wind. When the very wind blows for our special use, we may surely dismiss fear, said Mary, laughing and clapping her hands, but nearly ready for tears notwithstanding. The ship was a fine one, well fitted to breast any sea, and learning this, we at once agreed that upon landing in England, Mary and I should go to London and win over the king if possible. We felt some confidence in being able to do this, as we counted upon Wolsey's help, but in case of failure we still had our plans. Brandon was to take the ship to a certain island off the Suffolk coast, and there await us the period of a year if need be, as Mary might, in the case of Henry's obstinacy, be detained, then revictual and reman the ship, and out through the North Sea for their former haven, New Spain. In case of Henry's consent, how they were to live in a style fit for a princess, Brandon did not know, unless Henry should open his heart and provide for them, a doubtful contingency upon which they did not base much hope. At a pinch they might go down into Suffolk and live next to Jane and me on Brandon's estates. To this Mary readily agreed, and said it was what she wanted above all else. There was one thing now in favor of the king's acquiescence. During the last 3 months, Brandon had become very necessary to his amusement, and amusement was his greatest need and aim in life. Mary and I went to London to see the king, having landed at Southampton for the purpose of throwing off the scent anyone who might seek the ship. The king was delighted to see his sister and kissed her over and over again. Mary had as hard a game to play as ever fell to the lot of woman, but she was equal to the emergency if any woman ever was. She did not give Henry the slightest hint that she knew anything of the Count Savory episode, but calmly assumed that of course her brother had meant literally what he said when he made the promise to the second marriage. The king soon asked, "But what are you doing here? They have hardly buried Louis as yet, have they?" "I am sure I do not know," answered Mary, "and I certainly care less. I married him only during his life, and not for one moment afterwards. So I came away and left them to bury him or keep him, as they choose, I care not which." "But," began Henry, when Mary interrupted him, saying, "I will tell you. I had taken good care that Wolsey should be present at this interview, so we four, the king, Wolsey, Mary, and myself, quietly stepped into a little alcove away from the others, and prepared to listen to Mary's tale, which was told with all her dramatic eloquence and feminine persuasiveness. She told of the ignoble insults of Francis, of his vile proposals, insisted upon almost to the point of force, carefully concealing, however, the offer to divorce Claude and make her queen, which proposition might have its attractions for Henry. She told of her imprisonment in the Palace des Tournelles, and her deadly peril and many indignities, and the tale lost nothing in the telling. Then she finished by throwing her arms around Henry's neck in a passionate flood of tears, and begging him to protect her, to save her, his little sister. It was all such perfect acting. For the time I forgot it was acting, and a great lump swelled up in my throat. It was, however, only for the instant, and when Mary, whose face was hidden from all others on Henry's breast, smiled slyly at me from the midst of her tears and sobs, I burst into a laugh that was like to have spoiled everything. Henry turned quickly upon me, and I tried to cover it by pretending that I was sobbing. Wolsey helped me out by putting a corner of his gown to his eyes, when Henry, seeing us all so affected, began to catch the fever and swell with indignation. He put Mary away from him, striding up and down the room, and exclaimed in a voice that all could hear, the dog, to treat my sister so! My sister, my father's daughter, my sister, the first princess of England and queen of France, for his mistress. By every god that ever breathed, I'll chastise his scurvy cur until he howls again. I swear by my crown, if it cost me my kingdom, and so on until words failed him. But see how he kept his oath, and see how he and Francis hobnobbed not long afterward at the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Henry came back to Mary and began to question her, when she repeated the story for him. Then it was she told of my timely arrival, and how, in order to escape and protect her from Francis, she had been compelled to marry Brandon and flee with us. She said, I so wanted to come home to England and be married where my dear brother could give me away, but I was in such mortal dread of Francis, and there was no other means of escape, so, God's death! If I had but one other sister like you, I swear before heaven I'd have myself hanged. Married to Brandon? Fool, idiot, what do you mean? Married to Brandon? Jesu, you'll drive me mad. Just one other like you in England, and the whole damned kingdom might sink. I'd have none of it. Married to Brandon without my consent? No, no, brother, answered Mary softly, leaning affectionately against his bulky form. Do you suppose I would do that? Now don't be unkind to me when I have been away from you so long. You gave your consent 4 months ago. Do you not remember? You know I would never have done it otherwise. Yes, I know. You would not do anything you did not want. And it seems equally certain that in the end you always manage to do everything you do want. Hell and furies! Why, brother, I will leave it to my Lord Bishop of York, if you did not promise me that day, in this very room, and almost on this very spot, that if I would marry Louis of France, I might marry whomsoever I wished when he should die. Of course you knew after what I said whom I would choose, so I went to a little church in the company with Queen Claude and took my hair down and married him. And I am his wife, and no power on earth can make it otherwise. And she looked up into his face with a defiant little pout, as much to say, now what are you going to do about it? Henry looked at her in surprise and burst out laughing. Married to Brandon, and with your hair down? And he roared again, holding his sides. Well, you do beat the devil, and there's no denying that. Poor old Louis. That was a good joke on him. I'll stake my crown he was glad to die. You kept it warm enough for him, I make no doubt. Well, said Mary with a little shrug of her shoulders, he would marry me. Yes, and now poor Brandon doesn't know the trouble ahead of him either. He has my pity, by Jove. Oh, that is different, returned Mary, and her eyes burned softly, and her whole person fairly radiated, so expressive was she of the fact that it was different. Different? Yes, as light from darkness, as love from loathing, as heaven from the other place, as Brandon from Louis, and that tells it all. Henry turned to Wolsey. Have you ever heard anything equal to it, my Lord Bishop? My Lord Bishop, of course, never had, nothing that even approached it. What are we to do about it? Continued Henry, still addressing Wolsey. The bishop assumed a thoughtful expression as to appear deliberate in so great a matter, and said, "I see but one thing that can be done," and then he threw in a few soft, oily words upon the troubled water that made Mary wish she had never called him "thou butcher's cur." And Henry, after a pause, asked, "Where's Brandon? He's a good fellow after all, and what we can't help we must endure. He'll find punishment enough in you. Tell him to come home. I suppose you have hid him around some place, and we'll try to do something for him." "What will you do for him, brother?" said Mary, not wanting to give the king's friendly impulse time to weaken. "Oh, don't bother about that now," but she held him fast by the hand and would not let go. "Well, what do you want? Out with it. I suppose I might as well give it up easily. You will have it sooner or later. Out with it and be done." "Could you make him Duke of Suffolk?" "Huh? I suppose so. What say you, my Lord of York?" York was willing, thought it would be just the thing. "So be it then," said Henry. "Now I'm going to hunt, and I will not listen to another word. You will coax me out of my kingdom for that fellow yet." He was about to leave the room when he turned to Mary, saying, "By the way, sister, can you have Brandon here by Sunday next? I am to have a joust." Mary thought she could, and the great event was accomplished. One false word, one false syllable, one false tone would have spoiled it all, had not Mary, but I fear you are weary with hearing so much of Mary. So, after all, Mary, though a queen, came portionless to Brandon. He got the title, but never received the estates of Suffolk. All he received was the money I carried to him from France. Nevertheless, Brandon thought himself the richest man in all the earth, and surely he was one of the happiest. Such a woman as Mary is dangerous, except in a state of complete subjection. But she was bound hand and foot in the silken meshes of her own weaving, and the power for bliss-making was almost infinite. And now it was, as all who read may know, that this fair, sweet, wilful Mary dropped out of history, a sure token that her heart was her husband's throne, her soul his empire, her very wish his subject, and her will, so masterful with others, the meek and lowly servant of her strong but gentle lord and master, Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. End of chapter 21. End of When Knighthood Was in Flower by Charles Major. Recording by Judy Guinan.